Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to the Human Beauty Movement podcast, your source for hope, healing, happiness, and humanity. My name is Jennifer Norman. I'm the founder of the Human Beauty Movement and your host. This podcast is here to guide you on your journey of self-love, empowerment, soul alignment, and joy. With each episode, I invite beautiful humans from all corners of the globe to join me for open conversations about their life lessons and the important work that they are doing to help heal humankind. Take a moment now to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. I'm so glad you're here joining me for today's show. Have you ever felt like you're trapped in a life that wasn't meant for you? Like no matter how hard you try, how much you hustle, strive, or push forward, something just isn't clicking? Maybe you've questioned why life feels like an uphill battle of suffering and struggle, as if joy and fulfillment are always just out of reach. But what if your soul was designed for more? What if the life that you're meant to live is buried beneath layers of conditioning, past wounds, and illusions? And what if the key to unlocking it isn't working harder, but in breaking free from the very identity that's keeping you small? Today, we're joined by Daniel Darman, co-founder of Truth of You, a transformative practice that blends spiritual wisdom, psychology, divination, and somatic experiences to help people answer two of the biggest questions of all time. Who am I and what am I? Daniel's journey began in 2016 when he realized that suffering isn't just something to endure. It's a catalyst for soul growth and transcendence. As a practicing metaphysician, he explores philosophy, mysticism, magic, astrology, and tarot, not just as knowledge, but as a way to decode reality itself. His work is about peeling back the layers of illusion and reconnecting with the truth of who you really are. And if there's one thing he wants you to know, it's this. You're too big to be this small. So if you're feeling stuck in a life that doesn't feel like your own, if you're craving something deeper, or if you're simply ready to see beyond the limitations you've accepted for far too long, this episode is for you. By the end of our conversation, you'll gain new insights, powerful shifts in perspective, and maybe even the courage to step out into the life your soul has been calling you toward all along. Let's dive in with Daniel Darman. Hello, Daniel. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Jennifer?
I am doing great. Wow, you do some fascinating work. I want you to start out by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so basically I grew up in the suburbs, a typical Melbourne boy, typical family as you would expect. I had my own challenges growing up, which, as we all think growing up, what we experience is quote unquote normal. And then towards the teen years, and then as I hit 18, I developed chronic fatigue syndrome after internalizing, without even realizing, a lot of my own distortions and challenges growing up. And they continue to affect me on the material plane in a way that was unable to be diagnosed or understood through tests or through doctors, even through psychologists. They couldn't understand the problem because although it was manifesting through the surface level, it didn't originate from there. And there was no test or metrics that could be used to be understood. So I struggled along through most of my adult life. I'm 35 now, really attempting to get my life started, attempting to make things happen, realizing that the universe wasn't allowing it because of the obstacles that were both in my way and the obstacles and challenges that I was holding on to. And we don't realize, we get told when we go to sleep, all you have to do is relax. And the thing is, when there's parts of you that aren't even conscious, that can't relax, this is a challenge that people don't even understand how to begin to let go of the things that they don't know they're holding on to. So with 2016, it started with me losing about 30 kilos of weight. And we think of this as just eating less, moving more, hard work. If you're into astrology, it's very Capricorn energy. It's very unemotional. It's very boots on the ground. But really, as I was getting into the later stages where the weight loss slows down, I started to realize that there's more going on here with metabolism and the way the body actually functions. And I learned about, and even back then, about the ketogenic diet and the way metabolism and fat burst glucose burning actually changes the way the body functions. And that led me into then going to university to go study nutrition and become a dietitian. But I pulled out of that shortly, even with good grades, because I realized very quickly that the systems set up in place aren't necessarily fully conducive towards optimal human health, and that there are agendas, there are industries, there are lobbyists at play that make this very difficult to navigate correctly. And those in the professional space are bound by a lot of regulations that might be either flat out wrong or just outdated. I don't want to assign malice or conspiracy to any of it from the outset, but that led me down further rabbit holes that ultimately led me back to the deep nature of the transcendental of nature of my own challenges, and how most of us have a lot of suffering that we still carry and internalize in ways we don't understand. And so that's why we do a lot of the work that we do now, because we recognize that really to clear some of the challenges, you could spend years, decades, or even a lifetime trying to work through these when they can be done much quicker and much more simple. In the same way that if you take a car to a mechanic, they might have to pull apart the engine just to change the timing belt, but it's very easy to fix if you have the right tool for the right job. So I'm still very much on the path myself, but the level of wisdom and support I've had and the skills I'm learning about even how to integrate things like the law of manifestation and healing and transformation, they're still very much in evolution, but I feel like I have so much more to share now than I did even those few years ago.
Yeah, I think that this will be extremely instructional for our listeners, because already I'm sure that they can tell we're going to be talking about quite a lot of spiritual concepts. We'll be talking a lot about energetic concepts, and we'll talk about how what we call the material plane, or some of us call it the 3D world, what we can see, feel, smell, taste, touch. All of these things are one aspect of our living experience, but there is so much more going on. We believe that there is so much more going on that we can't see, because not all energy is physical. We can certainly talk about the quantum. We can certainly talk about other forces and things in epigenetics and in our pasts and deep-seated wounds that we might have and not necessarily know how they are expressing themselves. And so it sounds like when you were saying distortions, a lot of times we talk about distortions as like what culture is saying, what society is saying, the way that the man might be telling us that we should be living our lives. Is that the kind of distortion that you were sensing, or was it something else?
It's all of it. We all have our own nature, and we both have a nature collectively and individually, and understanding we want both of them. We want the whole thing to harmonize as much as possible. And so this is why sometimes even when we make ourselves healthy and correct our own distortions, our relationships might start to suffer because others haven't dealt with theirs. So yeah, it's the whole thing.
Yeah. And that gets to this idea of identity. It gets to the idea of the fact that a lot of times we look for the world to give us cues to who we are and what we do, and all of the different kinds of labels and assignments that we bring on to ourselves to say, this is Jennifer Norman, or this is Daniel Darman, and this is this person. But you're into this concept that this idea of fixed identity is an illusion, and it is a construct that is shaped by conditioning. Can you talk a little bit about fixed identity and how people might be able to understand that a little bit more and then recognize it for what it is?
Of course. So there is an element of you that's, you might say, fixed, and there's an element of you that's always changing. When we look back at the material plane, we look at the human body repairing and replacing all of its cells every 7 years. And so is the you that was 7 years ago the you that was now? In one sense, in the body sense, no, but in the spirit sense, yes. You can recall the memories. You might not be able to do so very easily, but we have the capacity to go back and understand our own lives with this sense of continuity of self. And so even though we still understand that we're ourselves, even those 7 years ago, we can still understand that the nature of us is changing. And so this is something I see in the spiritual space, is that people, they don't accurately grasp what the nature of an identity really is. And that also feeds into the bigger picture of, well, what is the identity of all the totality of reality? And in my direct experience, not necessarily belief, is that the nature of reality itself is truly infinite. And so with that, there is no fixed concept. There is no fixed perspective of what infinity is, because infinity is also always changing. And us as sparks and individual expressions of the divine. In Hinduism, they had the Atman, which is, you might think of it as the first degree of removal from infinity, where you do have a sense of self, that sense of, I am me. If God or the absolute is I am, then you might say the soul is I am me, or something similar to those lines. And so it gets back into this mystical typical notion of the waters that are always changing, because even though we can locate ourselves in some sense, anything we hold on to by identity ultimately is a construct. And this is another thing in Hinduism where they have the Trimurti, or the three gods, one of Brahma, which is creation, one of Vishnu, which is sustenance, and one of Shiva, which is destruction. And these are three stages of a repeating cycle of death, destruction, and rebirth. And so even understanding that our nature is, at least in the sense of the ego that we experience in this lifetime, is one that most people are very familiar with. The idea of a sense of self, especially one that transcends lifetimes, it's not too different, at least in my experience. There are similarities to it, but it also suspends everything that we hold from the perspective of the 3D and the material realm being as real as we think it is. When we wake up from a dream, we don't say the dream was real. We say, oh, I'm awake now. In the same way that when we go to the other side, from everything I've read, now this is, I'm stretching away from direct experience here, but when you pass over to the other side, there's been enough accounts of near-death experience and those entering the upper levels of the astral plane, and they realize that it's, in some sense, that reality is more real than this one. And so even locating yourself among different planes of existence as well make that feel more real. It's also part of the challenge, but it's also part of the game about being able to locate who and what you are, because to know who and what you are is to be able to both be grounded but also be free in every sense, in every place. And that's also what a lot of our work attempts to really work through and show our clients, is that you have to be comfortable being who you are, no matter where you are or no matter the circumstances.
That's lovely. And to that point, I know that for so many years, and I talk about this a lot on my show, where I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. I didn't feel comfortable with who I was, and I felt just completely lost. Even if I was with one person or a whole group, it was just like the insecurity was real. I was very intimidated. I was very shy, and it was just a bit overwhelming. And I struggled to really know myself. And so I did take on all of these constructs and try to like attach them to me to get some semblance of external validation or self, when I really would have benefited from doing that deep work earlier. I wasn't as awake as I am now these days, but if I were to be able to go through that earlier and just be liberated, it would have freed up so much of my own psyche and awareness of who I was. But to the point of, some people might say, well, that's good and well that I might not necessarily have to buy in to all of these labels and all of these constructs, but I got to live in this world.
And that's the challenge.
How do I manage and live in this world without being like all the way up in the astral field, just calling everything a game and throwing my hands up and giving up and just like sitting on a tree for the rest of my days, eating a pomegranate? How do you guide people who may be like, okay, well, I'm going through an existential crisis now. I don't know what is up or down is down. I don't know what is true. Because to your point, I think when the universe is infinite, truth is also relative for any given point in time and space, is it not? So what really, when we say getting to the truth of you, what does that really mean?
Well, first I want to correct that subjective experience, because even the idea of the subjective self it dissolves. So the objective subjective duality also collapses as well. And that's one of the hardest things to conceptualize. So sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, I was wondering, how do you assist people in coping then and in managing the day-to-day when they've now all of a sudden broken free and uncovered like this whole new aspect of themselves?
So the challenge is, this is something we've experienced in past lives and access to the quantum field ourselves, is that this world is incredibly noisy. There is so much distraction, and there are wonderful benefits, because now there's access to information and tools that never have been for the longest time in history, and it's available to everyone alongside cat videos and every little dopamine distraction that there is as well. So one of the first things is being able to gain space and quiet. The thing is as well is that when we talk about existing in the world, we're talking about the external phenomena of being. How do you act out in the world in a way that allows you to function and survive? And so there are already many pressures and challenges of society, and the collective have taken on a lot of beliefs and constructs as well about the idea of money, about the idea of business. You go back, hundreds or a few thousand years ago, outside of, paying taxes and tithes to the state or to your ruler, you could grow your own food. You could build your own house. There are things that could be done without the need for money. And so this is a belief that a lot of people don't realize how is deeply entrenched. But going back to that question is that we have to create enough inner space, and individuals need to carve out enough time to be able to actually ground themselves internally, because a lot of the lacking in this spiritual work is the feminine element of the internal. So in the tarot, we starts off in the major arcana as the Fool, and being able to let go and surrender. And, we've discovered a whole new world now because we surrendered. You get the Magician of going, right now I know how, you learn a few skills, you know what to do, you know how to manifest. But then we come back to the next one, which is the High Priestess. And you have to internally regulate, internally ground. This is deeply intuitive. And so when we look at the model of the left and right hemispheres as a concept, for example, it's all about bringing things into balance as well. So a lot of people already have a lot of the left brain and a lot of the logical and the more masculine understanding of how the world works and how to exist within it and how to function externally. But there's typically a lack or an imbalance or even an atrophy in some cases with older clients where there's a reduced capacity to be able to connect internally as well. And this can just be as simple as starting a dream journal. And in some cases, you might set an alarm 2 hours before you want to wake up, and you use the alarm and you just turn it off again and go back to sleep. You fall back into a light REM state, and it's very easy to dream from there. This is also how a lot of people in the astral projection space also do it. They'll set alarms earlier so they can get themselves close enough to awake that they can actually learn to tap into their own inner wisdom. So this is typically for the case that people want to go very deep, is that they need to be able to connect with their imagination and their intuition. And then in some cases as well, particularly with my partner and I, is also the need for somatics. There's a lot of research, and don't ask me to quote it now, with the idea of trauma being stored in the physical body and these energetic distortions getting held in the body. And this is something that I, through my own physical ailments, came to realize that these are just energies that aren't functioning correct. And even the need to do things like stretches. So I've had digestive issues, and I found opening up the pelvic floor helps physically relax everything from the navel down. And that's something that we don't think of something like stretches as something that's necessarily going to help us spiritually, but at the same time, the body is also interfacing with spirit too. So working across sometimes the body, sometimes the spirit. When we think of the pentagram, earth, air, fire, and water, all governed by spirit, being able to use a model like this to balance. Sometimes our thoughts are completely cluttered. We've had a client who was so deep in just intrusive thoughts that they couldn't connect to anything else. And some clients who are very emotionally sensitive. And so we need to work with that and tone it down and amplify their emotional state where necessary to help them, well, not necessary, but to help guide them into being able to gain that intuitive clarity there. So it really depends. Everything ultimately comes back to a model and being able to work with it from that. And we particularly find using the story of the tarot to be able to understand the journey of the soul through the Fool's journey, the major arcana. And I personally like using astrology as a very non-linear model as well to understanding where are people at. If there's certain transits, mundane or personal, playing out as well that might be impacting them, and just accounting for that as well. So even in psychology, we're still using models and constructs as well, and they're no different. They all have their place. But as I said before, being able to work with the right tool for the right job is something also that we gain guidance from our own higher selves now to be able to go, right, what can help them here? And that's why models for me are an enormous part of our work.
Wow. So when you had gotten to this place where you just knew that you needed things to change, you were able to tap into your intuition by finding that quiet space, by by like leaning into the surrendering of the material world and then just kind of going inward. Is that one
Oh
of the
no, I
steps
was
that
awful. I was terrible at it. It's one that I was almost completely conditioned out of. The ability to intuition and even the respect, this way of being is something that was almost completely lost on me. And the challenge with it is that's actually one of my greatest strengths. And so sometimes we can cripple ourselves by taking away the one thing we're incredibly good at by our very nature if it's deemed not functional. You know, in the West, we got told by my higher self in a regression, because Eleanor and I practice on each other, Eleanor being my partner.
I find it very powerful that you were able to really get to that place where you were able to listen to your intuition and to surrender to the true calling of your nature, something that you had probably denied in the past because it was unconventional, or perhaps there were beliefs around it that you had heard from others. But going full throttle into mysticism and a new way of healing it's brave and it's fascinating to me. The thing that I had learned is that everybody has the gift. Everybody has the power to really tap into their intuition and to know the answers. And a lot of times our own self-doubts get in the way. Yes, that's one thing. But then also it is helpful to have a guide, somebody who can help to create space if you're a novice and not familiar and need somebody that is perhaps more skilled or more tapped in to really help to kind of light up and help you kind of understand your own energetic path. So that's the intriguing thing about you, and you finding Eleanor, who is also of the same ilk. I think it's wonderful that you guys are like these beautiful twin flames that have come together to do this work. Speaking of different kinds of methodologies, because you mentioned astrology and tarot, two of our big ones, one that most people may not be as familiar with is QHHT, which is quantum healing hypnosis technique. This is a technique that you use to explore past lives. So I would love to have you share, since a lot of people might not be familiar with it. I actually did a session of past life regression with a practitioner. It was very interesting and very telling. Some people don't believe in it, but I would love to hear from your standpoint, your beliefs, and how you use this tool in order to help somebody in the now.
Yeah, of course. So it's actually a relatively simple technique from a science perspective, where we simply are able to relax. We call it hypnotize, but really it's a very just suggestible state where we quieten down the conscious mind. Or if you know anything about neuroscience, we take the beta brainwaves, the active state that we're in right now, having a conversation and thinking. We turn the knob of that one down just enough to allow us to drift into alpha, which is like going for a drive and you're like, I don't remember the last few kilometers, or watching the TV and you don't remember what you answered the question.
It's my favorite state to be in.
And then if you go deeper than that, you can go into a deep state of relaxation between waking and sleeping. And with stimulation of the imagination and the third eye, you can start to direct and channel those energies. So Dolores Cannon stumbled upon this method. She was the founder, and she's from Arkansas. She passed away in 2012, rest in peace. And she was a regular hypnotist who accidentally took someone a little too deep, and this lady fell into a past life. She then did several more sessions and then wrote her first book, 5 Lives Remembered. And so from there, she continued to develop her technique and perfect it, and traveled around the world, particularly to Australia, to pass on this knowledge. She loved visiting this country and teaching people the way of being able to connect not only with their own past lives, but being able to connect with their own higher self as well. And their higher self there's many names for it in many different cultures, but it's the part of you that lives between lives, that stores all the memories, that has access to all of it. And this exists, as we call it, on the quantum field, which is why Dolores Cannon named it from past life regression hypnosis into quantum healing hypnosis technique, because a lot of the healing that is done for clients during the sessions are done at the quantum field level.
And so if healing is done at the quantum field, how do you know that the healing is done? That was always the curious thing when I went through a past life regression session, is that when the practitioner said, okay, I'm clearing this, and then you wake up, I'm like, how do I know if it's really If it's really cleared, what does a past life have to do with my current life? So I think that, those kinds of questions might be in the listeners' minds about, well, it sounds intriguing. Does it help me to break free of a trauma or a problem that I'm having in the here and now?
Well, like you look at a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists, they look back to childhood to see where your trauma started. In some cases, like myself, a lot of the karma and the challenges I brought into this life didn't originate in this life. So not only didn't I have medical tests to be able to figure out what was wrong with me physically, even a lot of my upbringing, it wasn't reflective of the level of challenge that the result was producing. It might have appeared to be stronger than it should have been. And so some people who we might say overreact, are they really overreacting, or is there more to the picture that we're not seeing? And so that's something also that we have to account for, is that we bring in a lot of lessons that we want to work through, challenges that we want to overcome. And sometimes souls get stuck in the same pattern, reliving the same style of life.
Yes.
And one big one that I've taken on is the idea of there's sort of like this self-sacrificing energy. And it's very much worn on me as well. And this life is about learning how to do things on my own and learning not to have to rely on external support for others. And I got told very early on in one of my own regressions that, Daniel, you must understand no one is coming to save you. And that there is a very terrifying thing to hear if you got basically told by the universe that they're not here to help you. But at the same time, it also liberates you into gaining the perspective of, right, if no one's coming, then if I don't do it, no one will. And so going back to what you were stating about how do you know? Well, what's great about this work is we're not here to do it for you. We are guides and we are facilitators. And so anything you experience, you will know if it's true. You will feel it. And so I've had regressions where sometimes all I needed was a new perspective. Sometimes I needed the direct experience to be able to know what something is, not just believe that it was happening, but the direct experience of certain past lives that I've had, particularly ones that embodied strong themes of masculinity, because that's also something that had previously lacked in my life, is not a healthy or an unhealthy expression of masculinity. Just any expression of it is one that was severely lacking. And so even the past lives, to relive them, there is a part of the conscious mind that just goes, oh yeah, how did I forget that? It's very obvious from that state. And that's what's great about being in this state of trance, is not only are you very receptive to what the practitioner is stating, but you're also very receptive to what you're experiencing and understanding who you are in that moment. So I would say, how can you know? How can you believe? I wouldn't say believe anything. I would say hold a state of belief temporarily until you can know it through direct experience for yourself, whether it's real or not. Because that's how I've found it's helped me the most. Belief is necessary to some degree, but you shouldn't sit there and just say, well, this is my belief now. We do this work on the gnosis and the direct experience of what's happened for us and for our clients. And we've seen the transformation.
Amazing. Let's talk about, we were talking about childhood traumas and things that psychotherapists might dig up in the past. And then, of course, with past lives and then current suffering. You've said that suffering is not just something to endure, but it's actually a catalyst for soul evolution. How do you help others shift their perspectives to see that pain is part of the journey rather than something that they want to avoid or resist or cope with?
So we've basically, it's been stated up front here, this is not a light lesson for people to learn. Some people's suffering is immense and enormous, and also respecting people where they're at as well. We can't just sit there and say, well, it's all in the past and it doesn't matter now. And it's like, no, the reason that you feel that way is that there is part of you that holds on to it. And there's a part of you that still feels the pain and the suffering and the reality of it even now. And that must also be respected. This is how the shamans, the metaphysicians of the past, and they still exist today, they would work in these altered states to be able to either reclaim parts of the soul that were lost or to banish energies that weren't even theirs, to help bring about the balance. But I would say, first and foremost, it's about getting to know where they're at in as many ways as possible and being able to find out where you can ground them. Because even though a lot of people, we all have our challenges, our own distortion and expressions that might not necessarily be healthy, there are parts of us, if you're functional at least, there are parts of you that say might listen to reason or might be able to find your inner ground, and finding the anchor that we can ground the individual as well. So then we can then begin to expand on the nature of what that suffering is as well. Some people, like myself, I actually prefer a lot of humor, make fun of my own suffering, because that's when I take it seriously, that's how I hold on to it, where others jokes make it worse. Clearly, no one wants to have light made out of their challenges. So again, it really depends on the energy. I mean, in astrology, I'm very heavy in Gemini energy. So that's why I like to be very playful and very conversational and just talking it out. But others might need to just sit with it and really just keep asking themselves the question. Some people might need to take action. We look at certain emotions like anger, for example, and these are ones that you can't just let go of. These are ones typically that have to be channeled out. So even knowing how to direct these emotions is also one that's done heavily at a deeply intuitive level as well.
Amazing. You use so many different modalities, and there are, I would say, so many different ways that you can come at a problem. And a lot of times it gives you a cue in on somebody, like using tarot and going through the journey and revealing what resonates with that person and the story and the cards that come up. I think that's really fascinating. Astrology and birth charts and where people are on their sun signs and moon signs, and then other kinds of mystic practices, having shamans working to clear energy. All of it is, some people would say that it's a bit of the spiritual, and other people think that it is actually true. This is like the true nature of what the world is and how it was constructed. It's like this hidden architecture of reality, if you will. There is wisdom in numbers, there's wisdom in nature, there's like all of these hidden truths all around us, which is really fascinating. What do you think that all of this really means? It gets to the point of like, we're here for a reason. We're here, and is our fate fixed? I know that we were talking about fixed identity. Is this going to be the path that I take because my birth sign and my tarot cards and my and the shaman told me this? What about free will? What does this tell us about somebody's sense of self and then their inner souls, and how they can kind of they can bridge the divide between the two? A lot of people do lean on astrologers and others to help them show the way rather than kind of feeling it within themselves. So I'm curious how we can also equip people to appreciate or really understand the nature of all of these signs and symbols around us to really help us understand ourselves.
When I think of reality as the great infinity, we need models and tools to be able to ground and to make sense of anything. And what I love particularly about tarot and astrology the most is that they're one that attempt to have a holistic and complete cyclical model. And this is a challenge with a lot of models that we have. We might have a flowchart or a pyramid or something that it's not a nested hierarchy. And what that means is something that ultimately circles back on itself. This is very non-linear, but being able to essentially understand and just navigate the great infinity, understanding that cycles are very much at play for people, is a very big part of being able to decode how reality works. And even this is why understanding languages and models have been instrumental for me, because these are real, but they're also not real. Again, it's that duality of, do we accept it or do we not? And it's just a way to understand and interpret reality for myself, it's been access to the higher self. So once I've got the knowledge there, the higher self can be able to distill a concept very easily through this archetype. Oh, this is the archetype of the hermit. This individual needs to spend time alone in silence, really just trying to connect within. Or this person's working with the chariot. It's like they've got what they need. Now's the time to move. And so with it, there are no limits to the models either. And that's also sort of the shooting yourself in the foot sort of energy. Is that we think that, the scientists want to figure out the grand unified theory of everything as some sort of mathematical equation. And from my experience, it simply can't be done. But that doesn't mean that we can't use our own connection to certain things playing out and model that the planets in this like the sky and the sun and moon as well, and understanding that these are energies as well. We look at the way the sun moves relative to Earth through the seasons, and no one will say the seasons are just spiritual beliefs. We look at the moon cycle at 28 days, and we look at the menstrual cycle, the women's cycle is very tightly aligned to that as well. And that's why we associate the moon with mother and with femininity as well. It depends how you connect with them, but the more deeper you can connect with these energies themselves, the more you can see them real internally within you and not necessarily real just on a piece of paper or because someone else said it. In the same way that the construct again, I really love the idea of currency and money. Once upon a time, that used to be physical gold and silver that you could hold, or materials that you could barter, like your chickens or your cows.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's just debt-based instruments that are owed back to someone else. It itself isn't very real, but the model that we're using feels very real. That's how I've come to understand it. It's sort of grounding yourself in the groundless.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I'm thinking about the people who are listening who probably feel lost and they know that there is something more out there for them. They might be wanting to go deeper, and they've gotten to a place where they're just feeling unfulfilled with their lives, maybe with the jobs, with the news, all that's happening. And now they're saying, wow, I think that this is a calling. I'm listening to this podcast, and here they're talking about all of these ways that I might be able to know my inner self, my true self a bit more. You have this catchphrase, "You're too big to be this small," which I think is just so beautiful and magical. How can people start embodying their fullest potential? What are some of the ways? You mentioned, getting quiet, moving out the noise. What are some things, from a practical perspective that you would say people could ease into this work of, really discovering their higher self and their true power?
Learn to question. The idea is people take too much of this reality and themselves for granted, and they do not know how to go deeper. And I know, because that's exactly where I was once upon a time. We have to make sense of it. We have to understand it all. And there's so much more understanding that can come from going, I have no idea.
It's not the truth.
And I will sit in that. And I would also say, when you begin to question, you can also shake up the energy for the higher self to come through. You create openings as well, because you can sit in the not knowingness that can allow answers to intuitively come to you, where if you're trying to make sense of everything and you're trying to work within the systems that already exist, how is anything new meant to come through?
Mm-hmm. It's the difference between trying to think your way through it than feeling your way, or just letting it come to you. Yeah. There's nothing forcing about this at all. It's just like, having that patience and that space to let it come to you.
Yeah, but I've personally found for myself, and I see it with everyone else, is learning to question is enormous. Because if you can, and this is where I will recommend holding the belief that you are so much more. This is where also you'll hear a lot of people in the spiritual community talk about your soul is enormous, and what comes through in an incarnation is a very, very small part of it. And we all have access to, I had one client who we confirmed how many lives she's had incarnated on Earth, and it was hundreds of thousands, not just as human. And so the idea is we have access to so much knowledge, so much wisdom, so much experience. And if we hold ourselves to our name, this is another part of our work is soul contract numerology. Our birth name itself also carries frequencies that give us these energies of who we're going to be and what hints we can gain, because the birth name that we choose isn't random either. That's also selected, as well as our parents, as well as some of the major themes and encounters we'll have in our life. And that sort of answers the free will versus determinism thing you stated before. There are some things that are determined, and then there's free will within that container, we might say. But I would say, questioning, creating space, and then holding the belief, or at least holding space for the potential that you are so much more than just the meat sack that we call Jennifer or Daniel. And that the idea of who and what we are, I don't want to say exists outside of the body, but it transcends the concept of a body to begin with.
Is there a unifying desire for souls? I was just curious about, what if the soul, if our higher selves are grounded in connectivity and unity, do our souls really at the core level want different things? Is it based upon frequencies and energies that we have these different assignments, or are we one and the same? Yes and yes.
The way I've experienced that is that we are the same, moving towards further individuation. The idea of soul evolution is becoming more and more individual.
Hmm.
And then as we become more and more individual, so too do parts of us become more individual. And so again, the idea of being able to locate yourself as one versus many things, again, dissolves as well as yet another barrier to understanding yourself.
If there's
I would say yes,
Yeah.
then no to that question.
Yeah. Fascinating. Now, if there was one message that you would hope that people would take away from our conversation, what would that be?
Oh, just one.
Yes, just one.
You put me in a box here.
It's a podcast, so.
I would say always remember that you are on a journey and you are on a path, even if you don't realize it, even if you don't feel like it is. Everything is pregnant. Everything is rich with, I don't want to just say meaning. Meaning is still a construct of the ego. I would say with purpose. There's an opportunity to learn something from every encounter, the good, the bad, and the ugly, about yourself internally or about the world externally as well, and your place within it. And as long as we're just connecting with the fact that, we go back to infinity, there is no beginning, there is no end, understanding that if you can just connect with the present moment, you'll hear Eckhart Tolle talk about this a lot. Just learning to locate exactly where you are now, and don't try and be anything more or anything less than what you are. If you can just connect with, if you have struggles, it's okay to have them. And it's okay to ask for help, or it's okay to feel it through. It's okay to anything. That's one of my biggest ones that I've struggled with, is the idea of meeting myself where I'm at. Because again, those external pressures, but I've got to pay the bills. But I've got to do this.
Yes.
But keeps getting in the way. So that'd be my advice.
I'll be okay. Oh, Daniel, how can people learn more about you and the work that you do?
Of course. So our website is truthofyou.com.au. I'm on LinkedIn at Daniel Darman, Darman, and on Instagram at the Daniel Darman.
Daniel Darman with Truth of You, whose beloved partner is Eleanor Moshe, who was just on this show not that long ago. I was so enamored. I had to have Daniel on as well, and I'm so glad that I did. Daniel, you are such a marvelous guest. Thank you so much for being a beautiful human, a beautiful soul. Thank you for being my guest on the Human Beauty Movement.
Thank you for having me, Jennifer.
Thank you for listening to the Human Beauty Movement podcast. Be sure to follow, rate, and review us wherever you stream podcasts. The Human Beauty Movement is a community-based platform that cultivates the beauty of humankind. Check out our workshops, find us on social media, and share our inspiration with all the beautiful humans in your life. Learn more at thehumanbeautymovement.com. Thank you so much for being a beautiful human.